This program will be recorded, so if you'll have access to it later on, if you want to go back and listen to any of the brilliant things John's about to tell us. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Amy Arndt, the Executive Director for Friends of Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. And as you all know, we are a 501c3 nonprofit established in 1997 to support Ohio's only national wildlife refuge complex with youth development, public use projects, and most recently with land acquisition and restoration. We're located along the southern shore of Lake Erie, near Oak Harbor, and some of the most critical wetland habitats in all of the world. If you're interested in learning more about us and what we do, I will drop a link in the chat in just a moment. Today we're joined by Dr. John Juriga, who is a retired physician and the author of the biography, Bob Hines, National Wildlife Artist. One of my favorite parts of this virtual program series is how we can bring people together from all over the place for these important topics. And Dr. Juriga is actually joining us today from his home on the eastern shore of Maryland. So before we begin, we're just going to ask that you stay muted to minimize background noise for our presenter. And you can go ahead and type any questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end of the program. So John, thank you again for being here today. Are you ready to get started?
I yes, am indeed, yes.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amy. I thank you for the invitation to for this program today. And I must admit that this is the first time I've led a Zoom conference. So as I told Amy earlier this week, it is true that you can teach an old dog new tricks. And I am indebted to Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, the Visitor Center, for creating the Bob Hines Gallery and the Bob Hines Ranger Station, which I expect will get plenty of use once the restrictions are lifted. And I know in my heart of hearts that Bob Hines would approve of that, of those endeavors as well. Bob Hines was a self-taught artist who became the vehicle through which millions of citizens learned about their natural heritage. Robert Warren Hines was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1912. He was the second son to George Warren Hines and Mabel Nunemacher Hines. In 1916, Mabel Hines gave birth to an infant daughter who died within a day's time. She fell into a deep depression, and young Bob began drawing pictures to comfort his mother during this time of grief. Bob always surrounded himself with animals. In 1920, George Hines moved his family to Fremont, Ohio, in the northwestern corner of the state. Bob would wander barefoot on the grounds of the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Center until the burrs of the American chestnut pierced his toes. Mother Mabel tolerated crawdads and snakes in the icebox, and a horned toad climbed on her lace curtains to feed on flies. Mabel Hines died on Christmas Eve of 1925. Bob channeled his grief by attending to an ever-expanding menagerie of animals in his backyard. He also joined the local Boy Scout troop, which through which he became more acquainted with the richness of Ohio's natural beauty. He attended Camp Mayaconda in the near the Ohio-Michigan line, and he received an award there for outstanding scouting. He also wrote a newspaper column for the local Fremont newspaper. He made this meteoric rise in the Scouts, becoming an Eagle Scout with Silver Palm. And his entry in the 1928 Fremont High School yearbook includes this verse, "The mind of a sage and the soul of a boy." With the onset of the Great Depression, shortly after he completed high school, Bob taught himself taxidermy, and that reinforced his insight into anatomy and motion. He also worked a number of manual labor jobs. And when a health crisis arose, he decided to return to drawing. And this is one of his early dog drawings. It says, "From boy to dad, sincerely, Bob." In 1938, the local newspaper printed an article about a hunter in nearby Tiffin who shot a melanistic or dark phase pheasant. Not knowing what it was, the man left the dead bird in the field. And this act galvanized Bob to consider drawing wildlife so he could educate the public. Bob contacted Don Waters, who was the new state conservation commissioner, and scheduled a meeting with him in his home in Elmore. Hines arrived with a sheaf of drawings under his arm, and Mr. Waters offered Bob a position as a staff artist, starting at $2,200 a year salary. Knowing that his assignment would include oil painting, Bob went to Mary Williams, who was his former high school art teacher. And in a crash course of just 4 days, Hines learned enough about oil painting to serve him the remainder of his art career. And here we have Bob's portrait from the Ohio Division of Conservation and Natural Resources. One of his duties there was to compile Under Ohio Skies, which was a weekly feature that appeared in some 300 Ohio newspapers. And you can see here the mascot of the series was a walking, talking raccoon called Buckeye Bill. And here Buckeye Bill is saying, "Make it hot for Hitler, buy war bonds." And another Under Ohio Skies, this from World War II, the heading is "Hunting Will Hurt the Axis. Salvage of resources will aid the war effort." So hunters could save wild waterfowl feathers for use in vests and sleeping bags for servicemen. Waste metal could be recycled for the war effort. Even the fats from cooking game could be used for munitions manufacture. And Buckeye Bill is reminding readers that even used shotguns shells could be reused. So we in this generation could learn some frugality from that generation. Another duty of Hines was to illustrate the monthly Ohio Conservation Bulletin. And this panel from 1947 features the state-of-the-art fast action photography that was available. And on the left-hand column, Hines writes, "They swim, they walk, but the air is their true element. An alarmed drake, they swim, they walk, but the air is their true element. Mallards don't jump, they fly out of the water. An alarmed drake unfolds his wings, lays them on the water, thrusts vigorously, starts the upbeat, and is airborne all within 1/2 second of time." So Hines stored that knowledge and used it in 1955 to compose this mural of mallard ducks arising from a wintry pond. And this particular mural now resides at the Patuxent National Wildlife Visitor Center in Laurel, Maryland. Hines also decided to go for the gold, so to speak, and design a federal duck stamp. I won't go into the details about the federal duck stamp program because that could be the subject of an entire program sometime. But in 1945, Hines contributed 2 drawings, this one of pair of shoveler ducks, and also one of redhead ducks. And the judges at that time suggested that he simplify the redhead duck design and resubmit it the next year, which he did. And this design of redhead ducks on the water was inspired by a scene that Hines had remembered from the flock of ducks on the Sandusky River outside of Fremont. This design was chosen for the 1946-47 federal duck stamp. It was the first duck stamp to sell over 1 million copies, which was a reflection of the number of servicemen who were returning from service in World War II. It also is the 13th duck stamp in the series, and Hines recorded his impressions in a manuscript that he entitled "That Lucky 13th Duck Stamp." In it, he said, in the 30s and 40s, there were no great rewards for designing the federal duck stamp, no big publicity, and certainly no financial rewards. It was just the honor of doing it. And Hines even had to pay $1 for one of his own stamps. Here's a photograph of Hines at his drawing board, and if you look closely, that his federal duck stamp design is there on the drawing board. Hines had a chance meeting with Frank Dufresne at the annual trap shoot in Vandalia, Ohio. Dufresne was the chief officer of the Alaska Game Commission, and after reviewing some of Hines's artwork, Dufresne offered Hines the opportunity to illustrate his upcoming book on Alaskan wildlife. And at this point, Hines had not even visited Alaska, so he researched and labored over the illustrations. He worked over 2 months on this image of a leaping grayling, while he completed the watercolor of this bull moose in just 2 days. And the deluxe edition of Alaska's Animals and Fishes includes the bull moose on the frontispiece. And he always said that there was some irony in that the editors selected that particular image and not the grayling that he worked so hard on. Here's also a watercolor that he did of caribou fording a river in Alaska. In 1947, he was able to travel to Alaska with the Outdoor Writers Association. Frank Dufresne was one of the leaders of that particular trip. And here's a photograph of Hines fly fishing on Lake Wilson in Tongass National Forest. This is an unusual illustration, cover art for Pennsylvania Game News in 1943, which is unusual both for its anthropomorphism and its political content here. So Frank Dufresne joined the Fish and Wildlife Service as the Chief Information Officer and encouraged Hines to join him in the federal government. So in 1948, Hines moved to the Washington, D.C. area as staff artist for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this was the first piece of artwork that he completed as a federal employee. This is a scratchboard of a ermine or a weasel. Hines developed the wanderlust and said to Frank Dufresne that if he were going to illustrate wildlife, that he should be able to travel around and observe wildlife in their respective settings. So one of his first trips was a trip to Canada to work with the Canadian version of the Fish and Wildlife Service. He traveled to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta to tour the duck factory of the continent, as he described it. And these are a couple field sketches, one of a baby coot from Manitoba, and the other one for this young black-billed magpie, both in 1949. Hines also flew over a large white wolf who was running to escape the plane, and he later stated that it was the most magnificent display of animal strength I had ever seen. You could see every muscle in its body. Hines also traveled to Matamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina, and his assignment was to create a mural of hunting blinds in the refuge, but with his vision, he created this oil on board mural that depicts over 50 species of wildlife that are found on the refuge in Matamuskeet. Another one of his another one of his projects that he started were creating these retirement cartoons, collages for departing Fish and Wildlife Service employees. And this was the first one that he completed for outgoing director Albert Day in 1955. And Hines said that he probably completed over 80 of these murals. This was a watercolor of beavers that he completed for the National Wildlife Federation for one of their conservation stamps. And he was approved by none other than Roger Torrey Peterson for that artwork. In 1955, Hines completed a number of large murals for the Fish and Wildlife Service. This one we saw earlier of the mallard ducks. Here's a mural of commercial tuna fishing, which was on display at the Interior Building at one time. And this is the one mural that I have not been able to locate. So it's absent without leave, and no one seems to know the whereabouts of that particular mural. Here's a photograph of Hines painting this mural of a grizzly bear with two cubs. And the final product here is now on display, so I'm told, in Anchorage, Alaska, at the regional office of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Hines's duties were quite varied. Here's a photograph of him scuba diving in the Florida Keys, probably from the early 1950s. And Hines, being a duck stamp artist, was eager to observe how the annual design for the duck stamp was selected. And he was appalled at how subjective it was. And he suggested more of an open competition with rules and regulations and objective judges. And he proposed that to Frank Dufresne, and that basically is the standard by which federal duck stamp designs are selected even to this day. And this is a photograph of Albert Day on the left with Walter Weber's design of trumpeter swans that was selected in 1950, and I believe appears in the 1951 federal duck stamp. Here's a photograph of Bob Hines and two other wildlife artists, Ed Byerly and Walter Weber, both of whom designed federal duck stamps. Here's a quick photograph of Hines during a duck stamp selection contest, so to speak, and notice that there are all men present at this particular session. And here's a photograph of Lynn Greenwald with Bob Hines and B. Boons, who was Bob's trustee administrative assistant from 1974. Another photograph of scoring tallying the scores for the 1977 federal duck stamp. There's Hines on the left and Pete Anastasi wearing glasses in the center. When Frank Dufresne first suggested that Hines join him in the federal government, Hines was surprised and dismayed to learn that his first supervisor would be a woman, a biologist by the name of Rachel Carson. And he had his, being a product of his generation, he had some reservations about working for a woman, but Dufresne encouraged him to consider it. And he said, you really should come. She's something different. And Hines and Carson hit it off quite well. They developed a cordial working relationship and a loyal friendship. One of Rachel Carson's projects, she was editor at the Fish and Wildlife publications, was this Conservation in Action series. And this was the first issue of Conservation in Action that Hines illustrated from Bear River National Wildlife Refuge in Utah. Here's a photograph of Carson and Hines doing some research in 1955, I'm sorry, in the 1950s, I take that back. Carson asked Hines to illustrate her book, The Edge of the Sea. By then, her first book, The Sea Around Us, was a huge commercial success, and she resigned from the federal government. So Hines traveled south to the Florida Keys and joined Carson, and they conducted research from the Florida Keys up to the coast of Maine for The Edge of the Sea. Here's his Tidewater sketchbook from Booth Bay Harbor, Maine in August of 1951. And just show you some of his field sketches of the kelp here, the barnacles, which he describes as pale ivory and sienna, so that they appear white at a distance. Hines's artistic sensibilities did not necessarily align with the deadlines of the Houghton Mifflin Company, and Hines welcomed a reprieve. In 1954, he was assigned to return to Alaska to document wildlife there. And at Cold Bay, Alaska, where the landmass gives rise to the Aleutian Islands, he observed these magpies as well as ravens and crows. Also at Cold Bay, he watched a group of three gyrfalcons, one of each color phase, the white, the black, and gray, mob a group of ravens on a seaside bluff. And Hines wrote in a letter to Rachel Carson, "Almost as long as I've been able to read and dream, I have dreamt of seeing a gyrfalcon. From now on, I believe all birds will just be ordinary birds, for there is only one gyrfalcon. I have seen them, and I remember them, and I will always judge other birds by them." So The Sea Around Us was released in 1955, and this was Hines's greatest commercial success. This image of Hines at his drawing board with the starfish is or appears on the rear flyleaf of the dust jacket on The Edge of the Sea. Here's an illustration that appears from The Edge of the Sea of a jellyfish that Hines drew. And in the 11th hour, Bob labored to create this book plate for The Edge of the Sea, which I think is lovely, but the idea was nixed by Rachel Carson's editor, Marie Riddell. So after the success of The Edge of the Sea came the Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, for which history will remember her. And her research and writing was hindered by her diagnosis and treatment of breast cancer. So in 1963, after the release of Silent Spring, Bob volunteered to drive Rachel Carson up to her beloved cottage on the coast of Maine. She spent her final summer there, and then Bob drove up in the fall of 1963 to drive her back to Maryland. And he took this photograph of her on the deck of her cottage overlooking the Sheepscot River. And sometime later, he drew this undated pencil portrait of her that was never published. Shifting gears, in 1955, Bob Hines and a colleague hatched this scheme to convince the federal government to allow American wildlife to appear on a postage stamp. So the initial plan was for Hines to paint 4 species of trout, which would be given to President Eisenhower during a fly fishing trip in Denver, Colorado. But when as time approached, Hines was able to complete 2 of the paintings, which were given to President Eisenhower. And Eisenhower dictated a memo to his Postmaster General to support the idea. But if there's any historians out there, this was the time when Eisenhower suffered a major heart attack and was hospitalized, and those trout paintings disappeared. So Hines did eventually repaint the portraits of the trout, but they were never given to President Eisenhower. But anyway, the wildlife conservation stamps did go on to completion. The first 3 are monochromatic stamps. The wild turkey, the pronghorn antelope, and the king salmon were all released in 1956. And in the following year, in 1957, the tricolored whooping crane stamp was released. The whooping crane stamp was the second tricolored stamp released by the Bureau of Engraving, the first one being the American flag, but the second one, as I said, being these whooping cranes. And this design was selected by a British philatelic poll for one of the best 10 best stamps of the world for 1957. And the press run of 500 million stamps introduced the term conservation to the general public. In the late 1950s, there was a drought in the prairie pothole region of the country that affected the duck populations. So the Fish and Wildlife Service issued a number of press releases encouraging hunters to be able to recognize species of ducks, to spare those ducks, those species that whose populations were in jeopardy. And this was an initial illustration that Hines completed to identify canvasbacks, redheads, and ruddy ducks. He then went on to create this pocket guide. This was an accordion folded handout, black and white, of Know Your Ducks field guide for hunters. And one side depicts ducks that run along the surface of the water for takeoff, except in this panel, the wood duck has a vertical takeoff. And the other side shows those ducks that assume a vertical takeoff from the water. So Hines decided to expand this guide and created what became known as Ducks at a Distance. And he failed to find a commercial publisher for Ducks at a Distance, but when it was published by the federal government, it became a bestseller, so to speak, and sold millions of copies. It underwent at least 3 editions, and it was translated into both French and Spanish to aid hunters in both hemispheres of the Americas. In 1966, the Fish and Wildlife Service released Birds in Our Lives, which it was a very high-profile publications of the different ways that birds impact our lives. This was a portrait of Hines at that time. Perhaps the most striking feature of Birds in Our Lives was this watercolor of, or I should say oil painting, of a bald eagle that was reprinted into a collector's print. And the image had a modest sale in 1966, but the following decade, it was released as the symbol of our nation during the bicentennial year and sold something like 200,000 copies. And here's a photograph of Interior Secretary Stuart Udall holding an image of the eagle print for Bob to sign. Hines also traveled to Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, and here he is at night with Jewett Hall searching for alligators at Okefenokee. And he recalled that he was sitting in the bow of the boat, and that the gator's head came up on one side of the boat, the tail went up on the other side. He was right in the middle in complete darkness. He wrote, "I got sopping wet and I hollered like a banshee." He said, if you were still down here, you will find my hollering echoing around somewhere. I was scared and I admit it. And I don't blame him. This is that would be a memorable image. He went on to paint this image of Chesser Island in the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. You can't see Hines very well in the left-hand corner with his yoga pose. But this mural now is in the dining hall at the National Conservation and Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. In 1971, the Fish and Wildlife Service released Sport Fishing USA, which acknowledged the centennial of fisheries conservation in the United States. Hines did the illustrations, which are completed, which include 22 color plates that depict the habits as well as the habitats of the different fish. Oh, and so the first image I have here is that of the northern pike. Here is the black and white crappie, the brook trout, the Pacific salmon, and one of the Pacific marlin. But after the release of this book, Hines was dismayed that he forgot to include the filiform pectoral fins on the underside of the marlin. He usually had a pretty good attention to detail. The fish images were released as a series of collector's prints, and you can find them today on eBay. In 1971, Hines received the Distinguished Service Award from the Department of the Interior, I should say, and this is Interior Secretary Roger C.B. Morton awarding the honor to Bob Hines. And Morton's remarks include that his paintings became known for their accuracy and correctness. He paints wildlife in the process, in the act of being alive. So that is one of the hallmarks of Hines's artwork, is that he imbues that vitality into his wildlife subjects. In 1972, Ohio Representative Delbert Latta read into the congressional record that the Department of Interior can be proud to have Mr. Hines on his staff, for his service to his fellow Americans is priceless. So in 1975, the Fish and Wildlife Service released a publication entitled 50 Birds of Town and City that was aimed at non-birders to acquaint them with common birds. And these images were also reproduced in a series of a collector's prints. Here's the common nighthawk, a noisy killdeer, a clownish acorn woodpecker from out west, and a Steller's jay, which, like most jays, has plenty of attitude. And this is a photograph of Hines in his studio with the interior building with the Steller's jay drawing on the drawing board. In 1975, Hines submitted a painting of a salmon for the Abercrombie and Fitch fishing print. This was the second print in the series, and this was the design that was chosen. The selection process was modeled after that of the federal duck stamp. Unfortunately, around this time, Abercrombie and Fitch failed to find relevance in the modern society and closed, but occasionally you'll see this print up for auction or available on sites like eBay and sometimes Etsy. Hines always enjoyed interacting with young people. when he was at the Ohio Conservation Division of Conservation and Natural Resources. He started what he called chalk talks, where he would bring an easel and a pad in to a group of young people and spontaneously draw a image of a wildlife, an animal, and discuss his memories of that particular species. Excuse me. And he continued doing that when he worked for the federal government. He particularly enjoyed that with Boy Scout meetings. Excuse me. But excuse me, talking too much here during retirement. I know as I said, in my heart of hearts, that Hines would enjoy being honored with the Bob Hines Ranger Station at Ottawa because of introducing young people to nature. When incoming Interior Secretary Cecil Andrus arrived in Washington during the Jimmy Carter administration, Hines asked Secretary Andrus what he missed most about his home state of Idaho. And Secretary Andrus replied, elk hunting with his family in the fall. So Hines went on and painted this oil painting of elk and presented it to Secretary Andrus. And Secretary Andrus told me that he was just amazed that Hines was able to recall from memory the splendor of autumn in the high Rockies. This was also a cartoon that Hines drew for Secretary Morton, and this was, it says here, the Canada Gooses sang to Rogers Morton that, Mr. Secretary, us wildlife types have a few people problems we need your help on. And it basically depicts the conflicting parties that are present in wildlife management. And if you can see, the Interior Secretary is sitting on Pandora's box. In the late 1970s, Hines was assigned to return to Alaska once again to create a series of illustrations of wildlife that were in jeopardy due to human interference in Alaska. And he welcomed that opportunity to travel to Alaska again. Here's an image of a pine marten ambushing, I should say, a hen eider next to a stream. Here's a image of a peregrine falcon attacking these auklets in flight. This particular image is out of the Peel's subspecies of peregrine falcon, which is a darker subspecies that's found in the Pacific Northwest. On the Pribilof Islands, there are cliffs with thousands of nesting seabirds, and this is one image that Hines created of the nesting mures that nest on these steep cliff sides. And one of my favorites here, the salmon fisherman of the brown bear standing upright in a salmon stream. Hines went on to create a number of images that were released as a series of collector's prints. And ironically, they do not have the same degree of detail that the previous images have, but this is one of the sea stack of nesting seabirds. There's a dark tufted puffins on the left, a horned puffin on the right, and some kittiwakes in flight. His image of home defense shows a flock of kittiwakes mobbing this passing bald eagle. Hines said if he drew the image according to actually how it actually occurred to him, that you wouldn't be able to see the eagle because it was surrounded by these kittiwakes, these pelagic gulls. And but he noted that the bald eagle was not the main predator of the kittiwakes. That is, the kittiwakes left their nests. It was the ravens that moved in and fed on the eggs and the young of the kittiwakes. Here's a photo of Hines in his studio with the Department of the Interior prior to his retirement. You can see the oil painting of the Alaskan seabirds, the upper left, and just to the right, upper right, is the Steller's J image from 50 Birds of Town and City. And the three black and white panels to the lower left are from Birds in Our Lives. Hines retired from the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1981. In 1982, this image of wild turkeys was selected for a Virginia wild turkey stamp that had a modest sales. Here's a photograph of Hines judging at one of the Ward World Carving Championships in Ocean City, Maryland, here on the eastern shore of Maryland. And in the center is Cigar Daisy, who was a legendary waterman, market hunter turned wildlife carver. So Hines had hoped after he retired from the Fish and Wildlife Service that he could design another federal duck stamp, but his designs were never placed. And unfortunately, he developed an unsteady hand, which was the bane of any artist. His health declined, and he died in November of 1994. His cremains were returned to his home state, scattered around a venerable oak tree that towers under Ohio skies. And Bob Hines left an incredible body of work, a visual legacy that allows each person to connect with the natural world that Hines understood and cherished. And his artwork continues to enlighten, inspire, and educate us. So that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to entertain any questions from the participants.
We have such a small group today that if you guys have questions and you want to go ahead and unmute and ask directly, feel free. If you would prefer to type them in the chat, that's fine too. And John, if you don't mind, I have a question to get you started.
Okay.
What prompted you to write a book about Bob Hines? How did all of that come about?
Well, interesting. When I first lived here in Salisbury, Maryland, I was active with the Ward Museum of Wildfowl Art. And the Ward Museum has a changing gallery. And I was on the curatorial committee at that time. And I suggested in 2003 that we have an exhibit to commemorate the centennial of the National Wildlife Refuge System. So we happened to fall in with Russell Fink Galleries in Lorton, Virginia. Russell Fink purchased the Hines estate after Bob's death in 1994, and Russ was quite generous in loaning us information. So we compiled the exhibit of Hines's artwork, and then I compiled a trifold brochure of his a biography of Hines. And I always felt that there was more to the story than I included in the trifold brochure. And then in 2012, as the Hines centennial appeared on the horizon, I thought that would be an opportune time to return to my materials, and I decided to flesh out the biography of Hines, and the result was the biography. I should add that Hines was named the National Wildlife Artist for the Fish and Wildlife Service. He's the only person in the history of the organization to hold that particular title.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple comments in the chat. Lucy says, such a wonderful presentation, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Lisa says, yes, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And then Lucy also says, we have a few of his fish prints hanging in our library at the University of Toledo, so she was interested to learn more.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yes. Yeah, they still continue to circulate around. And as I said, if you look on eBay or Etsy, you'll sometimes find some of the collector's prints.
We had one turn up just recently. A couple years ago, we had a volunteer who had been to a camp or something in his youth, and Bob Hines had apparently been there and sketched out a beaver and was, giving sketches out to the kids, and he brought it in. He's like, is this who you're talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
So that sketch is actually hanging in the visitor center if we can ever get back in there. It's right in between the bathrooms, right by the drinking
wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Hines, again, was very generous with his time and talent, especially with young people. And, it could have been one of those sessions like the Chalk Talks that he gave, that he drew that. Sometimes he would appear at different conservation events and paint an image that might have been given out as the top prize for a raffle or a top carver or something along that line. So as I said, he was generous with his talents.
I actually did have a...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Good. Yeah, I actually did have a question. This is Lisa. Is there a reason why he didn't illustrate Silent Spring for Rachel?
Well, that's a good question. Hines said in his oral history that Rachel Carson called him and was in tears and apologized that he wasn't able to illustrate that particular book. That is apocryphal because I was unable to find any documentation of that sort in the Rachel Carson papers up at Yale University's Beinecke library that houses the Carson papers. I'm thinking that, as I said, with Hines's disregard for deadlines, that he may have not made a favorable impression with Paul Brooks, the Rachel Carson's editor at Houghton Mifflin, and that might have been a deciding factor. But I cannot answer that question with any certainty. I said, I just do not have any documentation that he was even approached for that particular book.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But his illustrations for the Edge of the Sea are simply beautiful and delicate and evocative.
And there were quite a few of them in that book as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely, definitely, yes. And subsequent editions of The Sea Around, The Edge of the Sea, excuse me, still contain his drawings. I think that it's would be virtually impossible to separate his drawings from the text of the book, since they complement each other so well.
Well, we've recently updated our online store, and the link that was included in your registration to purchase John's book may have popped up as invalid. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to pop a link in the chat right now where you can purchase a copy of his book if you would like to do so. And any other questions, comments? If not, we appreciate all of you joining us today and hope that you'll take just a moment to complete a survey to let us know how you enjoyed the program today. And as a special thanks to you for completing the survey, you will actually receive a 15% off coupon code, which you could use to buy that book should you choose. And thank you again, John, for such an illustrative program. That was very interesting.
Well, good. You're quite
welcome. Added on it 8 years ago, 9 years ago now, but it's always nice to see it again and have a refresher and
good.
Always learn something from it.
Well, thank you. And I thank all the participants for taking their time out to learn more about Bob Hines. And thank you, Amy, again for the invitation.
Oh, most definitely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.